breaking news now out of Iowa. The city of Davenport has released the causes and the origins report on what they say caused the partial collapse of the apartment building there that killed 3 people in May. According to this report, the root causes were inadequate capacity of the wall system, meaning the removal of multiple withes of masonry during the repair work in the 3 days preceding the collapse severely compromised the western bearing wall, and then it caused the building to collapse, as well as inadequate shoring, meaning that the temporary stabilization methods were, quote, severely lacking in multiple aspects. This report also highlighted proximate causes of the collapse, including improper understanding of the original building construction, inadequate construction documents, neglect of composite walls, inadequate oversight of repairs. The list goes on from there. The building owner, Andrew Wold, has filed a lawsuit against Select Structural Engineering for allegedly not warning the building or him that the building was structurally unsound or that residents needed to be evacuated. This lawsuit also alleges the engineering company didn't identify the risk of collapse, the danger of collapse, or repairs that would have avoided what we saw happen. Joining us now, attorney Misty Marris, to talk more about not only this report and what it reveals, but the lawsuits that are starting to pile on top of it. Misty, it's been a while. Nice to see you. So the blame game, that's what's happening here. You didn't tell me that the building walls were inadequate. Well, you didn't tell me that I had to tell you. I mean, where do we go from here legally?
Absolutely. Marni, great to see you. And now this is exactly what we're seeing. It is the blame game. Keep in mind that when it comes to liability for a catastrophic event like this, there's always going to be multiple parties who are going to be involved. So the engineering company, whoever was responsible for doing the work, as we saw in that report, the owner, management, whatever it might be, there's all sorts of contracts at play behind the scenes about who was responsible for identifying a risk that resulted in such a catastrophic event. So we're absolutely going to see more of these types of filings relating to identifying the parties who are culpable for this being able to happen, for the failure to evacuate earlier and all of that. So the blame game, that is the perfect way to couch it. And we're seeing that play out in the courtroom through these legal filings.
But this is an old building, and the engineering goes back decades, and some of the complaints do as well. How hard is it to prove who was responsible for not doing what they should have?
So oftentimes when you have a case like this where there are multiple parties who had a hand in some form, whether it be the repair, whether it be the work that was being done, the engineering firm, it is very difficult when you're going back decades because, number one, record keeping was different then. What was required to be saved might not even exist anymore, as opposed to today's standards where everything's electronic, right? So you go back and you have these paper records that likely have been destroyed at this point. So it is very difficult to ultimately prove the case and to find one entity or individual who is responsible. Oftentimes what happens is that there'll be multiple parties who will ultimately contribute to either a settlement with respect to these lawsuits, or will be identified at a trial ultimately as being partially culpable. There's something called joint liability, which means that it's not just necessarily one person. Two things can be true. It might be one entity in addition to several other entities who had a hand in what ultimately occurred in this tragic event.
Yeah, I got it. So if a settlement were to happen, who would be the beneficiary of that? How do they distribute funds?
So what generally happens, all of these people, the ones that lost loved ones, the ones that lost their property, think about the building collapse in Florida. It's sort of a similar type of issue. There was a fund that was put together, and then that was divvied out depending on the specific circumstances of the plaintiffs in those cases. So that's what happens. There is an assessment of damages. A fund is put together, and then it's allocated depending on the loss of each individual person. So you're going to see those that lost somebody, that will likely be higher. Property damage, that's a bit different. So it's an individual assessment for each person.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.